Welcome to Nightward Echo. Tonight, in 5 disturbing true California horror stories, we travel across a state where the light never truly chases away the dark. From the ghost towns buried in the desert to the quiet roads twisting through the redwoods, these are the encounters that blur the line between the living and whatever lingers just beyond it. Every story you're about to hear comes from people who experienced something they can't explain. Drivers who vanished off empty highways, hikers who heard their names whispered in the fog, and locals who swear some places remember more than they should. My goal this month is to reach 200 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers listen and disappear without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a place in California that unsettles you, a road, a house, a town, type its name below. Because when night falls on the Golden State, the past doesn't always stay buried. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath. And let us begin. I know how this is going to sound, so I'll give you the simple version first. I went hiking at night in the Mojave near Barstow because I got stubborn about a dare and a moonrise photo. I got turned around, saw what looked like a house made of mirrors standing on the hardpan, went inside, and walked out hours later with my feet bleeding and my mouth full of sand. The search team found me wandering barefoot at dawn. Nobody else saw the house. They said there isn't a structure for 50 miles. Since then, every reflective surface I look into refuses to look back. That's the part I can't explain. I'm telling it straight. You can decide if I'm lying, joking, or losing it. I'm 32. I work nights at a distribution center off I-15 and my days off are weirdly midweek. I never did big mountaineering trips, but the desert outside town is my reset button. If I can put a headlamp on and walk until I can't hear the highway, I sleep like a kid. My ex used to say the Mojave is beautiful and the way a closed mouth is beautiful. I didn't get it then. I do now. The night this started, my buddy Jamie and I clocked out around 11. He's one of those guys who makes everything a bet. He said the full moon would be bright enough to throw shadows even without a headlamp. I said I could shoot a time-lapse of the moonrise over the dry lake and get the clearest stars of the month. We argued until he dared me to prove it. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't high. I had water, a charged phone, a backup battery, a crappy little tripod, and one of those reflective emergency blankets in my pack because the box at work had a tear, and I took it home. I figured I'd be back before 3, sleep 4 hours, and be fine for the next shift. Jamie was supposed to come, but he bailed at the last second with a text about his stomach. I told him he was soft. I said it was an easy walk and the moon would light the way like a parking lot. He sent the laughing emoji. That was it. I parked off a dirt track east of Barstow, not far from a dry lake bed we used to mess around on with RC trucks. The air had that cold that lives an inch above the ground. My breath showed in my headlamp beam. When I turned the lamp off, the world went flat and silver. The moon had just cleared the low hills and everything looked strangely two-dimensional. The ground was pale and chalky. Occasional creosote bushes made round holes in the light like someone burned the desert with a magnifying glass. It was beautiful and weirdly loud, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I set the tripod on the hardpan and started shooting a slow time-lapse while I sat on my pack and chewed a protein bar I didn't want. It was one of those moments where you feel like a genius for doing something simple. The stars were hard points. The moonlight threw a shadow of my head on the ground, sharp as a stencil. I checked the frame every few minutes, nudging it to keep the moon centered. It must have been close to 1 in the morning when I noticed a glint on the lake bed. At first I thought it was my headlamp catching something, but the lamp was off. It was a steady glow, not the cold glint of glass. It sat low like a squat building would sit, and it seemed to be a lot farther out than I could judge. The desert does that to you. You think you're walking towards something you'll reach in 5 minutes, and an hour later it's still at the same angle in the sky. I told myself it was a travel trailer or some survey gear, but I also told myself I'd get a better photo if I moved closer. My brain did that little nudge of permission it does when you want to do the wrong thing and pretend it's right. I slung my pack and walked out onto the white. You know how people say mirages are wavy heat ghosts? This wasn't like that. The light didn't shimmer. It just existed, like a square of moonlight had decided to rest on the ground and hold still. The closer I got, the more it separated into planes. When I was maybe 200 yards away, It resolved into an open rectangle surrounded by angled sheets of something clear. It looked like someone had taken the frame of a small house and skinned it with mirrors at strange angles, so it didn't reflect you head-on. I could see pieces of the desert, the sky, me, the moon, all sliced and recombined in a puzzle that never made quite the same picture twice. I know what you're thinking. Who builds a mirror house in the middle of the Mojave? I was thinking it too. And the answer I gave myself was that it was an art thing. People install weird stuff out there. The desert is full of half-finished ideas. I told myself it would make a crazy shot. My heart was doing that rabbit thump it does when you see something unusual and you're not sure if you should be afraid or excited. I walked around it first. The walls were panes tilted inward and outward at different degrees, more like a kaleidoscope than a house. Inside, there were no rooms, just an open square of white floor made of the same hardpan as the lake. There was a gap like a doorway, but no door. The mirrors didn't show me straight on. Every time my face appeared, it was off to the side or at a sharp angle. When I lifted my hand to wave at myself like an idiot, the hand in the glass lagged a fraction of a second, then raised higher than mine and stayed there a beat too long. I laughed under my breath because I thought I'd caught the trick. It was just an optical illusion, the angles doing something to my perception. I stepped inside. There's a temperature on the other side of cold. The air in there had no weight. It was silent in a way my ears hated. I could hear my own heart, the slide of spit in my throat when I swallowed. The moonlight came in from above and bounced from pane to pane, so the floor looked like water and the sky looked like concrete. I don't know how long I stood there. You lose time in spaces that don't behave. When it felt like a good idea to leave, my body didn't listen. I took a step and the floor took two. The walls angled past me and the doorway fell away to my left. My reflection kept up, a step behind like a polite stranger in a hallway. I told myself to turn around and I did, except the reflection in the nearest pane didn't turn. He kept facing to my right as if the mirror held a different moment where I hadn't moved yet. It's hard to explain without sounding like I'm making it dramatic. I was calm. I was alert. I was not in danger. That's what I told myself. I raised my hand again, high, then higher. The reflection raised his hand late, then higher than mine, fingers splayed too wide as if his hand had more joints. My stomach flipped. I backed away and found the doorway again by accident, like stepping on the line where tile changes to wood in a dark room. The moment my foot crossed that threshold, the air had weight again. The world made sense. The mirror planes showed me what I expected except for one small thing. My reflection didn't lower his hand with me. He kept his palm up like a stop sign. His mouth was parted a little. For a second, I thought I'd caught my own expression out of sync, and then I heard a sound that didn't come from my ears. It was a voice in the way. A road has a voice when it's hot. The sound had heat in it, but no tone. It said my name without making the shape of it, the way your mind says your name in a dream. I took 2 steps backward and stumbled because the heel of my boot hit a ridge. My ankle rolled and I went down on my side. The impact was comical. It knocked the wind out of me. When I pushed up onto my elbow, the house wasn't there. The planes were gone. The desert was just flat and white. My tripod a weird little line against the moonlight 100 yards away. I lay there for a long time trying to believe I'd just had a weird panic moment. The simplest explanation is usually right. Maybe I walked toward a cluster of shallow pools left by a rare rain, and the angles of the water and moonlight made a trick. Maybe my sense of direction got turned around in the vastness and I stepped into my own shadow and got spooked. You can get vertigo in open spaces. That's a thing. I told myself all of that while I checked my ankle and sipped water. When I stood, my right boot felt wrong. The insole had balled up under my arch. I took the boot off and shook it. The insole hadn't moved. What had moved was my skin. It was loose on my foot like a sock. I know that sounds insane. I mean it only in the way of minor dehydration. My feet had swelled. That's all. I shoved my foot back in and tightened the laces. I wanted to get back to the truck, get home, sleep, and laugh about how the desert tricked me. On the walk back, I kept my headlamp off because the moon was bright. A couple of times I glanced left and right to check my shadow. It stayed where it should. But when I looked down to watch my steps over some scattered stones, the shadow lagged. A fraction of a second behind my knee. I told myself it was an afterimage from staring into reflected light. I told myself a lot of things. I got to the tripod and found that the camera had stopped 20 minutes into the sequence. The battery was fine. I pressed the shutter again and it refused me like a sulky child. So I took the tripod under my arm and walked toward where I thought the truck was. This is where I made the mistake you're not supposed to make. I was sure I knew the way. The ground felt slightly different under my boots, a powder that became paste that became dry cake. I followed the feeling because it matched the way I'd come in. After half an hour, the highway sound had thinned to a distant hiss. The moon had climbed high and the world was washed in one shade. I used the headlamp finally, partly for comfort, partly to see my breath. I didn't panic. I checked the compass app on my phone and it spun without settling. I put the phone away because the battery would die and kept walking with that stubborn belief you get in bad moments. If I just go another 5 minutes, the truck will be right over that low rise. At some point, my ankle throbbed and then went numb. The sand burned my lips. I stopped to drink and realized I'd been rationing my sips without noticing. The air was so dry the water felt like it evaporated on my tongue. The ground had turned to powder again. Little fox tracks crossed my path, then vanished. My headlamp hit a cluster of glassy shards and I flinched before I realized it was just the dried mud broken into plates. For a second, it looked like a smashed window. When I finally called 911, I did it because I could hear my mother saying my name the way she did when I was 12 and late coming home. The dispatcher's voice was overly calm. She told me to stay where I was and described the stars she could see on her screen like they were freeway exits. I gave her every stupid landmark I could find. A bush, a line of tire ruts, a low ridge to the west. She told me to keep my headlamp on and conserve my phone. She said a team was coming out. I sat with my back against the bush and tried to keep my breath steady. The desert changes sound. The longer I listened, the more it felt like the quiet was full of faint tapping, like 100 fingernails drumming on glass an acre away. The moonlight made my hands look chalked. When I lifted one, the shadow raised a beat late again. I told myself I was overtired and dehydrated and I needed to stop staring at myself. I pulled the emergency blanket out and shook it open. The shiny side caught the headlamp and threw it back at me so bright I had to squint. It looked like a cheap mirror. I didn't want to cover myself with it. I did anyway. I tucked my legs under, the way they tell you to do to keep warm, and I waited for the blue and red at the edge of the world. I don't know if I slept. I remember a dream I've had since I was a kid where I'm in a hallway lined with school photos. I'm the only one in color. Everyone else looks at each other, never at me. When a hand touched my shoulder, I flinched hard enough to tear the blanket. The voice belonged to a woman with a braid down her back. She wore a high-vis vest and a headlamp and said my name like she'd been saying it for a while. There were 3 other people behind her, one of them shouldering a pack that looked bigger than him. The 3 of them had faces like the desert makes faces, wind-chapped, tired, focused. I told them I was fine. They didn't argue. They gave me water measured in sips and a foil packet of something salty. They asked if I could walk. I said yes, and then when I tried, I made a noise I wasn't proud of, because the ankle I had convinced myself was only a little rolled was ballooned inside the boot. One guy loosened the laces with practiced care. He told me his name was Alvarez and that he would carry my tripod so my hands were free. I didn't remember giving him my name. He said the dispatcher had. He said they were glad I kept the lamp on. On the slow walk out, I pointed back over my shoulder and asked whether they had to come around the structure to reach me. The woman with the braid, her name was Tessa, asked what structure. I said the house. I told her it's made of mirrors and it was sitting out there like a bad joke, that it had to be an installation because nobody would build something like that for fun. Alvarez glanced at me and then out at the white. His headlamp swung across nothing but flat lake and low scrub. He said they came straight out from the road along the coordinates. He said they hadn't seen any kind of building. Back at the truck, the EMT looked me over and cleaned the small cracks on my heels and the spots the boot had rubbed raw. My ankle was wrapped. My throat hurt, more from breathing air that dry than from anything else. My hands shook when I signed the paper that said I wasn't going to the hospital. Someone handed me my tripod like a baton. Tessa stood a little apart with her hands hooked in her vest and asked again about the house. I described the planes and the way my reflection had lagged and then caught up wrong. I made a joke about bad art. She smiled because she was being kind. She said sometimes the desert gives you a mirage you can step inside. I said that felt about right, and then I went home and slept for 12 hours with the kind of sore that feels like a tax you pay. That would be a dumb story if it ended there. You could file it under guy gets lost and sees a weird thing because he's tired. The part I can't get anyone to treat like a punchline started after I showered. I came out of the steam and wiped the fog from the bathroom mirror with the edge of a towel. I did it without thinking, hand in a half moon. My face swam through. I looked like someone who had not slept well. I lifted my hand to smooth my hair, and the reflection lifted his hand a heartbeat late. Not a trick of fog, not the delay you sometimes see in a slow front-facing camera. My shoulders locked. I stood very still and tried again. Right hand up. The reflection's right hand came up too slow by a breath, then stopped higher than mine. Palm open like that stop sign again. I lowered my hand. He stayed there, then lowered his to match me. I told myself sleep debt and dehydration can make your head do stupid things. I told myself to eat actual food and touch grass. I made toast and stared at the dark square of the microwave door while it popped. The glass showed a softened version of the kitchen. When I leaned closer, the version inside leaned closer slower, then tilted its head a wrong angle like someone imitating me who hadn't seen the motion all the way through. The toast jumped out of the slots and I yelped like it was a snake. That afternoon I drove back to where I'd parked. The ankle was ugly but tolerable. I didn't go out onto the lake bed. I stood on the dirt track and scoped the white with binoculars until my eyes burned. An empty world is hard to prove empty. After 20 minutes, 2 trucks kicked dust in the distance. None drove out to the flat. Nothing shimmered except heat. A raven landed on the dirt near my shoe and looked up like it expected me to do something worth watching. I went home feeling stupid. At dusk, the mirror thing got funny in a way that wasn't funny. The TV's black before it fully turns on showed a room that almost matched mine. The glass in the picture frames did the same. When I stood very still, everything matched. When I moved, there was always a hair's worth of delay that normal glass doesn't have. Try it now. Lift your hand and your phone's off screen. Your reflection follows instantly. Mine didn't. If I kept moving, if I made a series of small motions like buttoning my shirt or tying my shoe, the other version fell behind, then hurried, then got ahead, then froze in a position that didn't belong to me anymore, like it was posing for a shot I wasn't making. I called Jamie because he's the person I call when I need someone to tell me I'm being dumb. He answered with a genuinely gross slurp of noodles and said, "You die out there or what?" I told him the whole thing in one go, skipping the parts that made me sound dramatic. He laughed, then heard I wasn't laughing. He said maybe I had a little heat sickness. He said our brains are just meat radios and mine needed to retune. He said I should come over because there's nothing more grounding than watching somebody else's junk TV. I said I would. And then I stared at my own doorknob in the hallway mirror for 5 minutes because the knob in the glass seemed to breathe. At his place, I caught myself timing our reflections in the black TV when it was off. Jamie didn't see it. He asked me if I wanted to throw a ball at the wall until we both stopped thinking, which is his way of saying I love you without having to say anything. I tried to keep my eyes off the glossy surfaces. The little framed team jerseys along his hallway made a parade of magazine-sized mirrors. In each one, the tiny me did everything I did with the same quarter-beat wrongness. When I told Jamie what I was seeing, he stood to the side of one and waved like he was checking out. His fingers matched. He made a face at me. He said, "Dude, you're fine." Driving home, the car windows held the streetlights as long yellow smears. At one red light, I glanced left and saw my face reflected in the passenger window. The copy didn't glance back. He was looking out and slightly up like there was something tall and close on the sidewalk. The light turned green. I stared straight ahead and kept my hands honest on the wheel, because I didn't want to have to explain any of this on the side of the road to someone with a badge. I slept with a t-shirt over the bathroom mirror, like a person who has lost a bet with himself. In the morning, I pulled it down because that felt more insane than anything else. The glass showed me as I expect to be. I shaved very carefully. The mirror didn't misbehave. I felt dumb enough to feel normal again. Then my phone buzzed and lit up on the counter with a new message from an unknown number. It was a photo of the dry lake taken from a low angle. You could see the cracked plates clean as teeth. In the middle distance, the mirror house stood like someone had drawn a cube with light. The sender wrote, "You left the door open." I don't know why I didn't screenshot it. I don't know why I didn't forward it to Jamie. I did what you do when you get a message you don't like. I turned the phone off and set it face down and walked away. When I turned it back on 20 minutes later, the photo wasn't there. The number wasn't in recent calls or texts. I convinced myself it was a dream I'd stood up in the middle of. Then I made coffee and burned my tongue and felt grateful to pain for being ordinary. That night, window glass went dead black as always. When I crossed the living room, I saw myself in the sliding door to the patio. The other me didn't cross. He stood where I had been a second before. He raised his hand. The palm was up. The fingers were too long. He pressed them against the inside of the glass. The skin didn't flatten like mine would have. It arched like the pads of a cat. Very calmly, like I was opening a cabinet, I reached for the deadbolt. I turned it halfway. The metal clicked. Something in me woke up in time to tell my fingers to stop. I backed away, breathing through my nose because my mouth had gone dry again. I slept with the lights on and woke at 3 to the oddest sound. Imagine a faraway church, the kind of bell they ring for a small funeral. Now imagine the sound is made of light instead of metal. It rang, and the space in between the notes was full of wind. A breeze moved the curtain by the sliding door. When I checked the lock, it was still turned to safety. The glass felt cold. At 7, there were 2 messages from Tessa from Search and Rescue. I hadn't given her my number. Maybe it's in the paperwork. She asked if I felt okay. She said she'd been thinking about what I said regarding the mirrors, and she wanted to know precisely where on the lake I'd seen it. This is the part where a sane version of me gives her a GPS pin and asks her to please go with a truck full of people and tell me I was a fool. Instead, I said I'd show her. She said she could be at my place in 20 minutes. On the drive, she let me talk. She asked a few practical questions. What color were the panes? How tall? Were there seams or frames? Did I feel colder inside than out? She didn't treat me like an idiot. She didn't treat me like a mystery. That steadied me. On the dirt track, she stopped the truck where you could see the flat. He'd already made the horizon boil. She handed me a wide-brimmed hat she had on the seat. She said we'd only go out as far as we needed to prove to me that nothing was there. I said okay and believed her, which was my second mistake. Out on the lake, our steps made that soft crunch people imagine when they think of snow. It's a different crunch, drier, more brittle. We walked 20 minutes and saw nothing but our own dumb shadows thrown sideways by a sun that hadn't cleared the low hills cleanly. I felt both silly and angry at the same time. I wanted the world to give me the courtesy of being either crazy or right. Tessa crouched and touched the surface with 2 fingers like she was testing a pie crust. She had that way about her of making invasive places hold still. Sometimes, she said, the desert repeats a thing until you leave it alone. I left it alone, I said. I left it alone all the way to my house, and it didn't leave me alone. She had me stand still and turn in a slow circle while she looked over my shoulder, not at me, at everything else. When I faced north, the light did a small wrong thing. It got tight like a white thread pulled across the air. Tessa's hand closed around my forearm the way you grab a kid at a curb. Do you see that? I said, and my voice landed below my feet. No, she said too quickly. I see heat, she let go. Let's go back, we turned. Behind us, something caught the sun. Not a shimmer. A clean square of night sky hung over the lake for a heartbeat, then went invisible like a fish rolled just under the surface. I felt the urge to step toward it like I'd felt the urge to open the patio door. It was as much a physical impulse as thirst. Tessa stepped 2 paces into my line of sight, breaking it. Hey, she said, not unkind. You did the smart thing calling for help the other night. Let's do the smart thing now and not walk into a heat trick. On the way back, my shadow did a final stupid thing. It leaned away from me for one exaggerated step, like a person lugging an invisible bag. I didn't tell her. I watched her boots and put my feet where hers had been and made it to the truck without doing anything heroic or fatal. It would be clean if the story ended with me deciding never to go back to the desert at night. That is in fact what I decided. I worked my shifts. I slept. I ate. I tried not to test the reflections. Sometimes I won. Sometimes I found myself with my face inches from the bathroom mirror, comparing the tiny veins at the corner of my eye to the ones in the glass. And they didn't match. Sometimes I coped by being petty. I stuck masking tape in an X over the microwave door. I left the TV on with a screensaver, just to deny the black screen its fun. I took showers with the lights off so the mirror was just a square darker than the rest. 2 weeks later, after an early shift, I woke to my phone buzzing itself off the nightstand. I grabbed it before it hit the carpet and saw a message from an unknown number. This time I did screenshot it. The photo was taken from my backyard through the sliding glass door. You could see my couch. You could see the TV. You could see me asleep on the couch with my arm over my eyes and my mouth open. In the glass reflection of the sliding door, You could see a square of light standing in the yard, just at the property line, a little to the left, angled toward the house. The text under it was simple. It said, "It looks different in the city. I don't know who you report that to." The police would take a statement and tell me to get cameras. Cameras point at glass. My body wanted to move all at once and lie perfectly still at the same time. I got up and walked to the sliding door and used the side of my hand to shield the glare so I could see my faint reflection. He didn't move right away. He lifted his hand eventually, slower, higher. He pressed his palm to the glass and the sound of a faraway bell came again. Or maybe it was a truck downshifting on the highway. In the reflection of the reflection, deeper in the glass, something like a wall of angled light unfolded. Very quiet, very patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Here's the part where I almost did something stupid. I say almost because I'm here to type this. I unlocked the door. I slid it open an inch. Night air came in with a dry leaf smell. The reflection did not line up with the opening. He stood in place slightly to my left, hand still raised. There was nothing in the yard. There was everything in the glass. I closed it gently and turned the lock. The copy lowered his hand late and then stopped halfway, like he couldn't tell if I'd asked him to stay or go. I keep thinking about what Alvarez said in a different context while we were walking out across the lake that night. He told me almost to himself that the desert isn't empty. It's full. It's just full of one thing over and over. Space, distance, heat, light, sky. You think you can pour yourself into it and disappear, and then you find the space pours back. I didn't understand him then. I think I do now. A week ago, Tessa texted to say she was transferring to a different unit and wanted to swing by to say goodbye. She stood on my patio and looked through the glass at my dumb couch and my taped-up microwave, and my too-clean TV, and didn't judge me for any of it. She asked if the mirrors still misbehaved. I said sometimes. She nodded. She said, "Does it feel like it's waiting for you to show up on time for something you didn't agree to?" I said yes. She put her palm on the glass without looking at herself. "You don't owe the desert anything," she said. "You called, we came. That's the whole contract." I want to believe her. I want to believe there's a contract. But at 3 a.m, when the bell rings, and the sliding door breathes like it has lungs, I think about the way my reflection looked past me in the car window, like he could see something tall and close that I couldn't. I think about the house on the lake bed, all planes and angles, a place that doesn't make room so much as moments. I think about how my reflection never looks back first anymore. I have to start every conversation. He waits. When I reach the end of a sentence, he finishes it wrong. When I smile to make it a joke, he lifts his mouth too wide. If there's advice in this, it's not useful. Don't hike at night alone, even if you think you're probably smarter than you are. Bring more water than you want. Tell someone exactly where you're going. Pay attention when your shadow misbehaves. If you see a house made of mirrors standing on the dry lake under a good, honest moon, remember that a mirror's first job isn't to show you. It's to show itself. If you step inside, be prepared to learn that you're not the most interesting thing in the frame. They told me they found me wandering barefoot at dawn, mumbling about a house the sun couldn't find. I don't remember deciding to leave it. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I walked out the wrong door and brought something with me. Maybe I'm still there. Maybe the version of me who made it home is a decent copy that forgets sometimes how to look back in time. I keep the lights on later than I should. I go to work. I take breaks outside. I try not to check every reflective surface like a vain teenager. When I can't help myself, when the itch gets too strong and I need to see what I am, I go to the bathroom mirror because it's the most ordinary one I own. I swallow. I lift my hand. I wait for the lag. For the last 2 nights, the other me did something new. He kept his hand down and his mouth closed. He didn't match me at all. He stood still and watched. It shouldn't feel like a win, but it does. It feels like I made a point without understanding the argument. I turned off the light and walked away and left us both in the dark. I'm not from the desert. I grew up near the coast where mornings smelled like salt and wet metal, not like rotten eggs and rusted batteries. I'm saying that because I want you to understand I didn't go to the Salton Sea chasing ghosts. I went for the same reason. You'd go if your friend kept texting you videos at midnight with captions like, "Dude, look at this," and the clips showed lights, skimming over black water like someone was dragging a handful of sparklers just above the surface. My friend is Maya, and at the time she was my girlfriend. We were 26. We liked driving nowhere for long stretches. We liked cheap motels and gas station coffee and the idea of catching something weird on camera and posting it for views. We weren't expecting the water to look back. This happened in February of last year. The air was cold and dry, and the sky out there has this pale, sick color like an old photograph. We left San Diego around 3 in the afternoon and took 86 straight to Salton City. We brought 2 cameras, my old Sony A7 for stills and Maya's phone clamped to a gimbal for video. We also brought 2 headlamps, a cheap drone, and a $5 plastic tub of earplugs, because everyone online said the tiny flies by the shore have a way of buzzing into your ears and not coming out. That smelled like internet exaggeration until we got there, and the air really did taste like a burnt match. We checked into a 1-story motel with a squeaky sign and a cat sleeping on the ice machine. The clerk was a guy in his 50s with sun-baked skin and a military haircut that had grown out just enough to make him look like he'd quit taking orders a long time ago. "You're here for the lights," he said, like he'd been waiting all day to say that to someone. His name tag said Phil. "We're here for the view," Maya said, playing it casual. "Do they have a schedule?" Phil smiled without showing his teeth. "Everything out there's on a schedule. You just don't know it until it starts." We laughed, and he didn't. He slid a real metal key across the counter. On the wall behind him, someone had tacked up a flyer. "Bombay Beach Art Weekend coming soon." The edges were sun-bleached white. Our room smelled like old carpet cleaner and cigarettes. But the door shut, the lock worked, and the bed didn't sag. Outside, the sun was already low. We dropped our bags and drove straight to the water. The sea is smaller than it looks on a map and bigger than it looks from the road. When you get close, the ground changes under your shoes. It looks like sand but crunches like chalk. Dead tilapia bones, loads of them. Ground to chips by decades of wind. The shoreline doesn't curve clean. It's broken and scalloped and receded, leaving a crust that looks solid until your foot sinks and you feel something wet and cold ooze into your sock. The flies were there, thick in the still air, and the smell was in everything. Maya kept her scarf over her mouth and talked through it like a nurse. We weren't the only ones. A pair of guys in camo jackets had set up tripods 20 yards down, and a family with 2 kids stood on the concrete foundation of something that used to be a dock. The father explaining what eutrophication means in a tight voice like he wished he were explaining roller coasters. On the other side, a woman in a faded pink hoodie walked along the waterline with a grocery bag and a headlamp, bending now and then to pick something up. A picker, maybe, grabbing old lures or metal scrap. The light had that blue-gray look where you can't tell east from west unless you already know. Birds wheeled far out, then dropped low like they'd flown into a pocket of heat. I set up my camera. Maya balanced her gimbal. We stood still and let the quiet fold over us until you could hear the flies and the dry rattle of a palm frond on a rotted trunk and your own breath going in and out. "Right there," Maya said, pointing through the phone. "Look." At first, all I saw was a reflection of a pale sky and a strip of black horizon. Then a light flicked on, just a faint point as if someone had struck a match under the water. It moved left without leaving a trail. It paused. Another point appeared to its right. Then both rose together and drifted toward us. The camo guys saw them too and murmured without moving. The family went quiet. The pink hoodie woman kept walking, eyes on the ground, not even glancing up. "Drones?" I said. "Too steady," Maya said. "Too low for that far out." A third light came on under the first 2. They formed a triangle and held. I lifted the Sony. The lights were so small they got lost unless I zoomed all the way in, and then everything else went to noise. Maya's phone did better. On her screen, the triangle sharpened against the water. Then the top point blinked and became 2 lights stacked on each other like eyes opening. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." I don't know how long we watched. Time gets stretchy by water, and the cold makes seconds ring like glass. At some point, the triangle drifted farther out and faded, and the surface of the sea looked like an oily mirror again. Maya kept recording until her phone warned about low temperature and dropped 10% battery in a minute. The camo guys packed up, their gear clicking like a rifle being checked. The family herded the kids toward a minivan. The pink hoodie woman filled her bag and disappeared behind the shell of a restroom building with no windows. We went back to the motel and pulled the curtains. Maya plugged in and I propped my camera on a pillow to transfer files. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the bed, knees touching. The kind of closeness you only get when the thing you're looking at is either very beautiful or very wrong. She opened the video. It began with her feet and the sound of the flies, then the horizon, then the lights. You know how phone cameras cut through haze and do this crisp digital flattening that makes bad things look better and good things look fake? It did that. The triangle was neat, bright, tight. It hovered with a confidence that made my scalp prickle. But that wasn't what made us shut up. Pause, I said. Back it up, she scrubbed backward. I pointed at the glare on the water just in front of us. It wasn't a glare, not exactly. It was a shadow within the reflection, and in that shadow was a shape from below, a darker dark. It looked like the top of a head seen through rain glass. You could say it was a patch of wind roughing the water, a ripple moving under the lights. It had the right rhythm. But when Maya paused and zoomed, the dark shape had an edge. You could make out the suggestion of ridges that might have been overlapping plates. And you could swear you saw a pale oval within it, like an eye not pointed at us but up past us, ready to meet something else that wasn't us. I stood and turned the lights on and off like that would change what was in the video. The room seemed too small, the bedspread too patterned, the air too still. Maya didn't move. She was the braver one, if you're wondering. I believed in things you can hold in your hand. She believed in things you can only hold as long as you don't admit you're holding them. It's the reflection of the lights, I said. It's just the lights reflecting back wrong. The lights are above the water, she said. This is under it. We looked at each other the way you do when you want the other person to be wrong for once and they're not. Then we did the very normal thing of trying to explain it with stuff we already knew. The area has geothermal plants and steam vents and gas bubbling up. The shoreline is weird. There's the military base. There's refraction and temperature layers. There's 1,000 reasons for lights to do what lights do. None of that had anything to do with what had looked up. We could have gone home right then and had a good, creepy story for our friends. We didn't, because Maya wanted the shot where she would walk the crusty shoreline with her headlamp and narrate, and the lights would come on behind her like she had called them, and she would turn and raise the gimbal and the 3 points would reflect in her eyes. She wasn't chasing clicks. She wanted to make the moment clean. We ate at the one open place near the highway, a bar with 12 neon signs and 8 people pretending they were just tired and not unhappy. The bartender was a woman about my mom's age with a t-shirt that said "Save the Sea" in faded green. A guy at the far end wore a Navy hat and told the man next to him that the sound last night wasn't frogs. It was the pumps failing again. We ordered burgers and fries and stared at the TV without watching it. When the bartender brought our food, she glanced at Maya's scarf and my big coat and said, "You two camping?" "Just filming," Maya said. Trying to catch the lights, the bartender nodded once. "Don't go out past midnight." She said it like she might say your fries are hot. Then she walked away. After dinner, we sat in the car with the engine off and our breath clouding the windshield and argued, like couples argue when both of them are right, and neither wants to be the one who says it out loud. We compromised. We'd go back to the shore for an hour, get the shot, and be back in the room by 11. The air felt even colder when we stepped out. The flies were gone, replaced by the quiet squeak of palm trunks rubbing against themselves in the wind. The stars were there if you looked up and not down. We walked farther along the shore than before, to a place where the crust extended out in thin shelves, and you could see where the water had sat last year and the year before, like bathtub rings. There was a collapsed pier far to our left. To our right, a burned RV and a concrete frame with no walls. The water was glass. Maya started the take. She walked in a slow half circle, headlamp off, only the phone light on. She talked in that calm way she has. "We're at the Salton Sea and it's about 9:45. We're south of Salton City. There are no boats. There's no traffic on the water. The only sounds are the palms and us." She stopped and scanned. I kept my eyes on the horizon, trying not to focus on any one point because that way you can see when the dark changes. They appeared the way they had before. 1, then 2, then 3. This time they formed a line for a long beat and then slid into the triangle. They were closer. I don't know how to explain distance over water at night, but the lights felt like they were in our air, not theirs. Maya didn't turn around. She whispered, "Do you see them?" And I said yes without moving. We stood like that, pretending we were invisible, which is a very human thing to do in a place where nothing needs you to be there to notice you. The crust cracked behind us. Not a loud crack, a soft, crisp sound, like someone stepping on a handful of dry chips. Just once, we both turned at the same time. There was nothing. Our footprints led back toward the parking area, and the rest was unmarked and pale under starlight. Maya faced the water again. The lights had spread farther apart and lowered until they looked like they were sitting just above the surface. The black film of the sea bulged a little, a round swelling that moved with a heartbeat I didn't want to think about. I felt the ground give a fraction under my right boot, then settle, as if something under it had tested my weight. My phone vibrated in my pocket. That's a stupid detail to include unless you felt it out there. How every normal thing becomes a flare in a field of dark. I pulled it out without thinking. The screen lit my hands, and for a second what I saw wasn't the time or a notification or my lock screen. I saw the water from above, in grayscale, 3 bright points and a black oval beneath them, drifting toward a strip of land. I saw 2 human shapes on the strip. I saw the smaller shape lift a hand and the lights tilt, like they were following the movement. Then the image blinked and became my lock screen again, my thumb pressing against the glass and not registering. "Maya," I said. My voice sounded wrong. "We should go." Instead of answering, she took 3 slow steps closer to the edge and crouched. The crust there was thin and papery, the kind of thin that sits on top of something cold and jelly-like. She peeled her scarf down and whispered, "I can hear it." "What?" "It's like, you know when you put a shell to your ear and it's just blood and the ocean at the same time? Like that, but wet." I reached for her shoulder. She flinched but didn't stand. The triangle of light slid right, left, stopped like they were deciding how to become a shape together. Something knocked against the underside of the crust near her knees. A gentle tap. Then another. Then very softly a drag, like a palm pushed up from below and felt nothing and decided to push again. Maya lifted the gimbal and tilted the phone until the lens was right above the surface, angled down. On the screen, the water looked thicker, almost syrupy, as if the pixels had weight. She zoomed in. The black oval resolved into ridges again, then into plates, then into overlapping plates, like the back of a giant isopod in an aquarium exhibit, except smoother, too smooth, and pale lines traced between the plates like the seams weren't seams at all, but eyelids not used to being closed. A single pale oval opened and shut once, slow, and when it opened again, it wasn't looking at the lights. It was looking straight through the glass of Maya's phone at Maya. She made a sound that wasn't fear exactly, more like pressure releasing. She leaned back and the crust hissed and sank a fraction. I grabbed her and pulled, and the shelf cracked in a line that ran outward and then sideways. The water bulged there too. The 3 points lifted a foot. Then they fell and the points stretched, like they were smearing into arcs. The arcs bent and touched at one end and became a curve, a mouth not opening but forming. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't like teeth or lips. It was like the idea of a mouth became geometry and hung there and everything reflected in it wrong. We ran. The problem with running on that shoreline is you can't run like you learned to run as a kid on grass. You have to pick your feet up and set them down like you're a waiter carrying soup. We did our best. I glanced back once and saw a shape not breaking the surface but pressing it up, like a hand under a tarp. The lights came with it, each one perched on the highest point of the unseen curve, as if they were attached without being attached. The shape didn't speed up. It didn't need to. It could move the ground we were running on and let us do the math. The parking area was 50 yards away. The burned RV looked less like a joke and more like an empty fireplace. The concrete frame had a shadow inside it that wasn't from the stars. We hit the hard ground where the chips turned to dirt and scrambled to the car. Maya threw the gear in the back. The gimbal clanged against the metal seat bracket. My phone slipped from my pocket and hit the floor mat, lit up and showed my own face reflected black-eyed for a second, before the screen went dead from the cold. I started the engine. The headlights carved 2 white cones across cracked asphalt, then a brown edge of weeds, then the flat road back toward the motel. In the rearview mirror, the water was a black band, the shore a paler band, the sky a gradient up to nothing. I couldn't see the lights. I told myself that was fine. We didn't talk until we were in the room and the curtains were shut and the heater was on, and the smell of old cigarettes felt better than fresh air. Maya sat on the bed and replayed what she'd caught after I dragged her back. It was short, shaky, a mess. It also showed the thing I can't write off even now. When she pulled back and the crust cracked, the phone caught her own reflection in that thin skin of water. It's quick. You could miss it if you blink. In that reflection, her headlamp was off. but 2 steady points glowed where her eyes would be if you rotated her reflection so it faced you. She shut it off and didn't cry. She's not a crier. She just made herself small and leaned into me and breathed shallow. Sometime after midnight, we heard somebody argue outside. A woman's voice, and then a man's, and then a car door, and then silence like the air thinking about breaking. We slept with the lights on. I woke just before dawn to a silent room that felt like it was listening. There's a window over the sink that looks toward the sea if you lean the right way. The glass had fogged with our breath and the heaters wheezing. On that fog, finger lines were drawn from the outside like someone had taken a cool fingertip and traced 3 paths down the pane. They weren't straight. They curved a little and they met almost at the bottom, and where they met a pale oval had been pressed that didn't quite leave a mark, more like it pushed the fog thinner. A mouth shape would have been funny, like a prank. This wasn't that. This was the shape of weight. Maya didn't want to see it. She wanted to leave. I wanted to leave too. It's weird how fast bravery gets eaten by a night like that. We loaded the car fast and didn't check under the bed or behind the bathroom door. Phil was at the desk with his coffee when we dropped the key. "You're early," he said. "Bad night," I said. "We're heading out." He looked past me toward the parking lot. Most people drive to Bombay Beach before they go. They want to see the art. It makes them feel like nothing out here belongs to the place. It belongs to people, and people can leave. "We'll see it some other time," Maya said. "Do the lights show up in the morning?" Phil sipped and considered. "They're not lights," he said. "If they were lights, they'd be looking for somewhere to land." We didn't answer. He nodded once at nothing and turned his coffee cup in a small circle, as if he was aligning it with something that wasn't on the desk. We took 86 north, then west. The sea slid by on our right like a film we'd already seen enough of. When we crossed the bridge over the canal, Maya said she felt better. I said the air smelled normal now. We told each other the right lies. We got on the freeway and joined the stream, and everything felt predictable again. The red lights ahead, the green signs, the big trucks with names we knew. I was tired in that heavy way where you think coffee will help, but sleep is the only thing that would fix it, and sleep is not available. We didn't upload anything that week. We watched the footage together once more and agreed it was too easy to pick apart, too easy for people to call fake. We turned both cameras off, dropped them in a drawer, and tried to make our lives small for a while. We put the earplugs on the shelf and forgot them. We made dinner and didn't talk about the way the water had bulged. A month later, I was alone in my apartment because Maya had decided we were better as friends, because both of us had too many things in our heads and not enough silence to share anymore. It was a clear night and the city lights made a dome over everything. I took a shower and brushed my teeth and reached for my phone to set an alarm. I hadn't thought about the Salton Sea in a few days. That's the truth. You learn to starve certain memories, hoping they shrink. When I picked up the phone, the lock screen showed my face. I hate that. I hate being reminded that the first thing most of us see in the morning and last at night is our own reflection. My hair was wet. My eyes looked tired. Behind me, the bathroom was fogged from the shower. The mirror had a streak where I'd swiped my hand across it. I raised the phone a little to catch more light. Something small and heavy tapped the underside of my desk. Not hard, not like a knock, like the way you'd test how thick a piece of glass is if you could only use the back of your fingernail. Tap. A pause. Tap. The phone vibrated then, not with a call, not with a text. With nothing, like the way it did by the water when it showed me the view from above. I held it tighter. The screen brightened. My reflection sharpened. The pupils didn't match. Not right away. It's subtle. The left one dilated a fraction of a second before the right. Then the right caught up and held, too big for the light in the room. You could say it was an artifact. You could say the software was trying to compensate for something. You could say it was proof that I didn't sleep well and should get some sun. I went to the kitchen and put the phone face down and poured a glass of water from the tap. The water tasted fine. I drank all of it and set the glass in the sink. There was a thin film on the surface that caught the overhead light and made 3 bright points before it slid to the drain. That was probably grease. I don't cook much, but I'm sure I'd fried something this week. I tell myself details like that all the time now. I don't go back to the Salton Sea. I don't watch other people's videos of it at night. Because their cameras do that digital flattening and the good things look fake and the bad things look better, and it doesn't matter. Because once you've seen the water really look back, Any screen is just a thin wall for your own eye to press against. The desert is good at keeping what it's owed. I hope the lights don't follow you. I hope, if you ever find yourself standing on a crust that crackles like a bowl of dry cereal over something that wants to learn your shape, you remember to step back before it makes room. But if your screen vibrates for no reason and the reflection shows your pupils not matching, and you hear a soft, patient tap from beneath your desk like someone testing how thick the world is, don't tap back. Don't tell it you're there. Don't give it your schedule. If it were only lights, they'd be looking for somewhere to land. And if it's not, it already knows where you live. I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. I can't explain what I saw without sounding like I'm making it up, and the one person who could back me up is gone. If you hike near Mount Shasta and you hear a noise that sounds like people whispering inside a hollow bottle, turn around. Do not go looking for the source. We did, and now my nights feel like a hallway that never ends. I grew up in Redding. Shasta was always there like a loaded question. On clear mornings, the mountain looked fake, like someone placed a perfect white pyramid behind the pines. In town, people tell stories. Lights drifting over the tree line, hikers who came back with missing time. There's this whole subculture that talks about ancient cities inside the mountain. Most of it is harmless. Hikers with too much sun making up stuff around a campfire. I used to camp with my dad at Panther Meadows and fall asleep to the sound of guys in down jackets arguing about ley lines. I loved the mountain, but I never bought into the hidden civilization thing. Rocks, ice, old lava tubes. That's all. The three of us met through a climbing gym. Sam worked the desk and always had chalk on his jeans. He was the type who reads topo maps like novels. Elena was new to the area, a paramedic who climbed like she was trying to outrun a thought. We'd do easy routes outside Dunsmuir on Saturdays, get beers, talk gear we couldn't afford. Late last September, when the night started getting cold, Sam brought up a rumor he'd heard from a guy at the gear shop. Something about an unmapped cave system on the lower northeast side, past some old logging roads, lava tubes that linked into a bigger chamber. He'd heard it twice, once from a volunteer with the county search team, and again from an old-timer who claimed he'd found a breathing hole in the forest floor that made his compass spin. I should have let it stay a story. But I had a new helmet light and a weekend off, and there's a way a plan builds its own momentum when you're 30 and restless. We decided to go look. The idea wasn't to go deep, just to find an entrance and see if it was a real tube or a snow plug. In and out before dark. We said all the right safety stuff. Spare headlamps, flagging tape, 2 coils of cord, extra batteries, handheld radios. We logged a route plan with a friend, texted pin drops, told my brother we'd be back before midnight. That all makes it sound responsible, which I guess it was until we made one decision that turned the rest into decoration. We took the rumor seriously. We left at dawn from the turnoff near a dirt track that looked like 2 scars in the grass. The day was bright but cold. Ice glazed the grasses in the shade and crackled underfoot. The smoke from controlled burns down in the valley made the air smell like a wet campfire. We hiked in single file. Sam had the GPS and that lanky stride people get from years of backpacking. Elena moved quiet and fast. I trailed with the second coil and a thermos I kept telling myself I'd share when we stopped. There was no official trail. Sometimes we followed game paths, sometimes we moved through lodgepole like we were swimming. 2 hours in, we found the first sign that the rumor had teeth, not a cave entrance, a sound. At first, I thought it was wind in the trees, a low sort of tone. But the pines were still. The sound seemed to come from the ground, like you hear when you hold a seashell to your ear. Except there was no shell, just moss and rock and cold dirt. We wandered and the noise changed, louder in some spots, softer in others. The GPS pinged us near a shallow dip full of ferns and old snow. The center looked like someone had taken a punch to the earth. A circle of crusted ice dropped into shadow. It wasn't big, maybe a meter across. A breathing hole is the right word because when we crouched at the edge, our exhale curled and was pulled downward. You could feel the draft lift the fine hairs on your wrist. Sam lay flat and shone his light. The beam disappeared into black. He tapped a rock and dropped it. We listened and listened. It fell a long time and then made a sound like glass knocking glass. If you've never done any caving, there's a rule about holes that narrow. You don't go in head first unless you know you can get out. We argued it. We were not going to fit 3 human bodies and packs down a meter-wide tube with smooth sides. But Sam got that look he gets when he thinks a map is hiding something and started circling the sag in the ground. 20 yards off, he found a fissure. A crack where frost and roots had pried two slabs apart, just wide enough for a careful person to slip. He peered in, tasted the air. It smelled like a basement and old leaves. We left flagging tape tied to a bright branch. We double-checked radio batteries. Sam went first. Elena and I followed, our packs hanging from a rope so we could ease them and not get wedged. The crack angled down steeply and opened into a space that took our breath with cold. I had that feeling you get when you duck into a crawl space and realize the house above you is heavy. The rock was basalt, black and shiny in our beams. The ceiling arched like the inside of a throat. The drafts rolled over our faces like someone sighing. It was not comfortable. It was not mystical. It was a place the sun had never been. We shouldn't have gone farther than the first chamber. That's where a sensible person would have taken photos, said wow, and backed out. But there was a slope at the far end where ash and pumice had cascaded like scree, and at the bottom of that slope a flat passage, waist high, with the cold moving through it like a stream. Sam was already wriggling to see. Elena and I shared a look and followed. Our elbows and knees found the smooth parts out of instinct. Headlamps made a tunnel of pale light and everything outside it fell away. The sound changed when we got through. At first it was the same low breathy tone, then it fractured into something else, not words. The closest I can get is this. If you've ever been in a high school auditorium 15 minutes before the play starts when actors are warming up their voices backstage, you know that hum. Bits of almost language, air-shaping but not landing. It rose and fell, and sometimes it sounded close enough that I turned my head to say what. Then remembered no one else had spoken. We dropped 3 flagging tabs tied to cord at the threshold and made ourselves be disciplined. Every time the passage twisted, we marked it. Every time it widened into a room, we stopped and checked our heading on the cheap baseplate compass that had never failed me before. The needle jittered. I tapped it. It spun a slow circle and settled facing the wrong way. Elena stared at it and then at me. We laughed the kind of laugh you do when you don't want to talk about how your hands just got clammy. I wish I could give you a neat map of what came next, but the cave didn't care about our gear. It went where it wanted. We moved through a hallway that had little ribs on the floor like frozen waves. Then we turned and belly crawled under a lip so tight our packs scraped. The walls had a skin of white crystals that looked like frost but weren't. When I brushed them, they chimed. I checked my watch. 3 hours since we'd gone in. We should have turned back. The only reason we didn't is because the floor began to slope. Gentle at first, then plainly downward, and the air carried that humming whisper like a current. It was like standing outside a stadium and hearing the crowd and wanting to peek. We told each other 5 more minutes, then 10, then until the next room. None of us said out loud that we wanted to be the first people in a place. But that's exactly what it was. The room wasn't big. Not at first. It was round and smooth and empty except for a pillar in the middle that had formed where drips had fallen a long time. The hum was louder. It had a pulse. Sam swung his light and it flashed off something that threw a line across the ceiling. Glass, I thought, except it wasn't a bottle or trash. It was a pane. A sheet grown inside the rock, clear as ice but not cold, standing at an angle like a tilted window. Behind it, the wall looked far away, like miles. That didn't make sense. We got closer. If I put this on paper the way my eyes took it in, it sounds like a trick. A mirror that wasn't a mirror. A sheet of something that let our light through and also bent it. Sam crouched, squinted, grinned. Elena looked past it with her head slightly turned like she was trying to hear with her eyes. The pane was flush with the floor and cut into the ceiling, and there were hairline fractures inside of it that formed a lattice like a spider web that had been frozen mid-spin. Our headlamps made the fractures glow. It didn't look natural. It looked made. And behind it, deep, there was a city. I know how that reads. The pane wasn't big, maybe 2 by 3 feet at its widest. But when you looked through it, there was depth that shouldn't have been there. Streets like wires, towers like stalagmites that had grown hollow and then been lit from within. The light was wrong. It wasn't a color I could point to. It was sunlight and fluorescent, and the exact way a match looks just as it flares and you smell sulfur. The shapes behind the pane didn't move like they were alive. They moved like they were being remembered. Sometimes they slid a little, then jumped. My stomach turned. I looked away and the hum shifted and hit some part of my chest that made it hard to breathe. Sam whispered, "Do you see that?" And I said yes. Elena said, "It looks like a reflection except it isn't ours." We stood there for I don't know how long. I kept blinking because my eyes had started to water, and when I rubbed the tears away, the scene behind the pane looked closer. You could make out something like a walkway with rails that might have been carved or grown. There were shapes at the edges of the geometry that were the right height to be people and the wrong width. I don't have better words. They were like silhouettes cast by a flame that was in the wrong place. I reached out instinctively, not to touch the pain, but to make sure my friends were there. My hand bumped Elena's sleeve. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were pinned to the scene like magnets. Sam raised his phone to take a picture and the pain's glow flared. The hum rose. It was like a room full of breath had been pulled at once. We all took a step back. The hum split into whispers then, and every hair on my arms lifted. The knot language sharpened into a rhythm that wasn't grammar but felt like it. It came from everywhere. From the pain, from the floor, from the arch we'd crawled under, from inside our teeth. Sam lowered his phone slowly and put it away. He said we should go. His voice came out tinny. I nodded. Elena didn't answer. I put a hand on her shoulder and she finally blinked and said, okay. We moved backward, keeping our lights on the pain like keeping your eyes on an animal you don't want to startle. As we backed up, the depth behind the glass shifted. The streets elongated. The towers folded. I could swear the scene turned slightly as if what was behind the pain wanted to keep us in view. I thought, let's not make this the last thing I ever see. We found our cord, our flagging, our knee prints in the dust. We did exactly what we'd planned in case of emergency. We followed our own marks. And yet the cave did not give us back to the world quickly. The passages seemed longer going out, slightly different. Places we'd been sure had been smooth were jagged. The air had a taste like coins. The hum rose and fell and at one point stopped altogether so suddenly. I stumbled and braced both hands against the wall, because the silence felt like pressure. Some obvious part of me wants to tell you that something chased us right then. It didn't. Nothing grabbed my ankle. No hand came out of the rock. It was worse because it was almost gentle. It was the way the light from our headlamps shivered on certain surfaces the way heat does above asphalt. It was the fact that 3 times when I glanced behind us, the beam bounced off not black rock but a reflective plane that returned our light wrong, and something on the other side of that wrong window looked back without eyes. We made it to the first chamber where the draft smelled like old leaves, and that smell felt like an ambulance siren because it was honest. We climbed into the crack like swimmers coming up from a too long dive. When we spilled onto moss and ferns, I thought I might cry. The sun had shifted. The shadows were longer. I'd promised my brother we'd be back by midnight. I looked at my watch. The display showed an hour that wasn't possible. We were behind by almost 6 hours. We moved fast but not careless. We didn't talk more than necessary. The farther we got from the breathing hole, the more the hum faded until the only sound was our footfalls and the quiver in my chest each time the wind shifted. The sky was a clean, clear blue. The mountain looked exactly the way it always did, like a postcard nobody believes in. If any of this had happened to someone else and I'd heard about it over beers, I'd have argued until the bar closed that you can scare yourself stupid underground. I kept replaying the pain in my head like a picture on my phone I could pinch and zoom. You know how your mind sometimes drops a ping of something you forgot? The thought hit me like that. We hadn't closed anything. We hadn't touched anything to open it or close it. We'd only seen. We were maybe 20 minutes from the logging track when Elena stopped. She didn't sit. She just stopped like someone had pushed pause. I turned and she was looking past me instead of at me. I followed her stare. On the slope not far away, something was sitting. I say sitting because it was folded the way a person sits to rest on their heels, but it wasn't a person. Its silhouette matched the wrong width shapes in the pane. It had length where a torso should compress and narrow where a shoulder should widen. It was the color of the rock when it's in shadow. It didn't move. For a long beat, I thought it might be a downed tree. My brain trying to pick a safe label the way you call a horror movie a comedy to trick yourself. Then it leaned without using hands, and the movement was punctuation my body understood and rejected. Elena whispered, "Do you see it?" I said yes. It didn't chase us, it tilted. That's the word I can't get past. It tilted in place the way a reflection moves when you move your head, as if its presence depended on an angle more than position. It didn't have a face, but I felt looked at in a way photographs don't make you feel. Sam said, "Keep walking," and we did. I felt its regard slide over us like a thin taste. When I glanced back, the shape was closer without having crossed the distance in any way I could point to. Imagine a window reflecting you from inside a house you're standing outside of. Then imagine that reflection stepping a little forward in the glass. That's how it moved. We reached the track and then the dirt pullout and then the old truck with dust on its hood we had written clean lines in that morning. The radio in the cab crackled once with static like the cave had one last breath and then died. We didn't talk on the drive. Sam's knuckles were white on the wheel. Elena kept her eyes on the rear view. I stared at the mirror above the dash and watched sky, trees, a strip of road, and several times a smear move across the glass that didn't match any tree or post. When we finally hit the highway and the signal bars lit up, my phone went crazy with texts. My brother, the friend with our route plan, a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be a CHP dispatcher, asking if this was still a search or if we had self-rescued. That's a phrase you don't ever want aimed at you. We checked in at the ranger station in McLeod. A woman with clear eyes and a coffee mug listened while we said we were fine, and back and sorry for the trouble. She didn't ask what we'd seen. She did ask exactly where we'd gone in. We gave her the coordinates. Her mouth twitched like she knew the spot. She handed us a form to fill out, and when Elena leaned over the counter to take it, the woman's gaze snagged on the reflective badge on Elena's jacket, like something behind Elena had just moved inside the glass. I saw her pupils widen just a fraction. She collected herself fast and said, "You should get a hot meal and go home, sleep, and if you're hiking again, stick to marked trails." That night I went to my apartment in Redding and didn't sit down. I did not look into the black square of my TV. I pulled a blanket over the bathroom mirror like I was a kid after a scary story. I tried to laugh at myself and failed. I went to bed and lay on my back and watched the ceiling and thought about pains and depth that didn't match distance. Around 2 in the morning, just as I was drifting toward a place that wasn't quite sleep, the room changed the way a room changes when a person steps into it. I didn't hear a door. The air tilted. The shadow at the corner by the dresser had breadth it hadn't had before. I told myself your eyes are tired and your brain is taking shapes and making them into something to chew on. Then the mirror under the blanket clicked like a fingernail-tapped glass. Once, twice, I didn't move. I counted my breaths until the sun pushed a smear of pale into the blinds, and the pressure let go like it never had its hand on me. In the morning, my phone vibrated with a text from Sam. It said, "Meet me at the coffee place." That was it. I went. He looked bad. Not dirty, not hurt. Just like someone had changed the lighting in him. He said he hadn't slept. He kept looking past my shoulder at the wall clock in a way that made me turn once as if he were watching a second-hand stutter. He told me something had stood by his back porch around 3 and turned when he moved like a reflection. His words, not mine. He said, "I'm going back." I said, "That's a terrible idea." He nodded and agreed and then said it again. I asked where Elena was. He said she'd been on shift and then didn't answer his call. He looked at his hands and said he had to see if the pain was still there, if it had been a trick of fatigue or carbon dioxide pooling or a geologic optical thing. He listed reasons the way you list groceries when you know you'll forget milk. I didn't go with him. That's the part that makes my throat tighten when I think about it. I told him he was being stupid, and that we should at least tell someone exactly where he'd be, and he nodded and said he'd text from the trailhead. He did, then he went quiet. I drove around my apartment for an hour, and then went home and stood in the doorway of my bedroom and stared at the blanket on the mirror, and felt like if I took it off, the room would lean. I tried Elena again. It went to voicemail. Sam never texted again. The CHP called me the next morning because they had my number from the route plan, and the ranger had given them the coordinates. They found his truck at the same dirt pullout. No forced entry. A thermos on the passenger seat. Footprints to the tree line. No footprints coming back. They asked me if he'd said where he was going. I told them and listened to my own voice sound like coated metal. The search teams went out with dogs. The dogs didn't like the spot. That was as far as anyone official would admit. I went to the station in McLeod and asked the same ranger what they'd found. She looked at me too long and said, "The mountain keeps what it keeps." It's a stupid thing to say to someone who just watched a friend vanish, but she said it like she meant it the way you mean a thank you when you are trying not to cry. The next week was a knot. Elena and I went to 2 briefings. We stared at maps. Evenings were worst. Lights do strange things in windows after dark. I stopped using my microwave because the door had a shine and sometimes a smear would pass across it, and the food inside would be fine, but my appetite would go numb. I kept waking at 3. I learned that the city doesn't get quiet at 3, it just sounds like it's breathing through a filter. Once I heard the exact hum from the cave and the plumbing. Another time, my bathroom mirror fogged and a fine print appeared like when you breathe on glass and write a name. Except nobody had breathed on it. The print looked like the pane's fractures, lines inside the glass, a pattern that the human eye reads as intention. I wiped it and it stayed because it wasn't on the surface. I took the mirror down and put it in the hall closet and shut the door. And still at 3, I heard a small click like something tapping gently from the other side. 2 weeks passed. The official search wound down. Late in the second week, Elena called me past midnight. Her voice was hoarse. She said she hadn't told anyone because she knew how it would sound. She said at work she'd been cleaning the inside of the ambulance, and when she caught her reflection in the stainless steel cabinet, there was a shape standing behind her shoulder that didn't belong to the dimensions of the truck. She turned and saw nothing. In the reflective surface, the shape turned in the same instant she did. A fraction out of sync, like a reflection that was thinking. She said it made her jaw buzz and she had to sit down on the bumper and breathe the way you teach people to breathe through panic. She asked me if I still had the coordinates. I said yes. I thought she meant to go back. She said not to go back, to give them to a friend who could drop a seismic microphone in a breathing hole and see if the hum had a pattern. We never got to do that. The next morning, she didn't show up for her shift. I called her. I drove to her place. The door was locked. The landlord let me in because I said her name in a way that made him decide not to argue. The apartment was neat. The bathroom mirror was gone. The closet door was jammed, and when I put my shoulder to it, it came open as if pressure had been pushing out from inside. The mirror leaned against the inner wall with a blanket over it. I didn't touch the blanket. I left and called the police and then drove around, in slow circles with my hands shaking, on the wheel while my brain, as a kind of trauma control, directed me to turn at familiar landmarks. The CHP called me again the day after. They asked if I knew why she might have left town. I said I didn't and then told them everything I am telling you here. The officer on the phone listened without interrupting and then asked me if I'd been drinking. I said no. He said to call if I heard from either of them, and I said I would. Now it's October again. I moved apartments. I threw out the mirrors I could throw out and painted over what I couldn't remove with that paint they use in yoga studios to reduce glare. It helps some, but there are still windows. There are backs of spoons. There is the black face of my turned-off phone. At exactly 3 many nights, the room tilts a fraction of a degree. It's not dramatic. The lampshade pulls slightly toward the big window like a tide. The air gets cool the way cave air is cool, not a breeze, a presence. And I hear whispers in the kind of rhythm language has. I can't make out words because I don't think there are words. But there is intention. It sounds curious. It sounds patient. I left town for a while in spring, went to stay with my cousin near Sacramento, and for 2 weeks nothing odd happened. We ate dinner with the TV on, and I breathed like a person who had never been underground. Then I went to a hardware store with walls of polished tools and a rack of chrome flashlights, and I felt the aisle bend around me the way a hallway bends in a dream. I didn't buy anything. I went home and sat on the front steps and watched the street and pretended the sun was enough to hold anything at bay. At 3, there was a click from the bathroom and another click from the toaster, and I realized that distance is less useful than I'd hoped. Back in Redding, on a Sunday late, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft taps and then a 4th that had the sound of finger on glass instead of wood. I stood in the hall with my hands sweating and didn't move. The knocks came again, exactly the same rhythm. I opened the door because some part of me knew that not opening would make my head fill the empty space with worse. No one was there. The hall light showed the scuffed paint of the opposite wall and the little frames my neighbor put up of birds she sees in the park. There was a faint mark on the wall across from me at shoulder height. It looked like a smear. When I leaned in, I saw it wasn't on the paint. It was inside the clear plastic over one of the frames. A line like a hair caught between layers, except when I moved to the left. The line turned with me as if it cared where I was. I'm making myself write this down toward a point, and the point is this. If you go hiking and you hear that low gathered sound under your boots where it shouldn't be, leave it to the people who understand what a mountain does with its air. Don't go in with a headlamp and a stack of good intentions. Don't go look for ancient cities. Caves don't care about your stories. If there is a city in there, it is not a place you can visit the way you visit a memorial or a museum. The panes inside the earth are not windows. They are more like quiet mouths that open when light touches them, and when something looks back through, the looking isn't benign. Attention is a kind of rope. It pulls both ways. My TV is on right now, volume down. The screen is reflecting the room and also the street behind me in the window. The reflection of the street is a few beats behind the live view. If I wave my hand, I can watch it wave back with a delay that is half a blink. That shouldn't happen. I tried to film it. The video shows nothing. I try to sleep with a nightlight like a kid because darkness is just a set of off mirrors. I keep thinking about Sam saying he had to see if the pain was still there. And I think about Elena feeling a presence turn as if it were thinking. Some days I manage to treat those as bad memories the way you treat the details of a car accident. Other days I am certain there is a shape waiting at angles in every reflective surface, not moving forward, just tilting. It's not trying to be seen. It's waiting until it is the only thing left that can be seen. Tonight the mountain is snowless and the air is clear. You can stand in my parking lot and see the peak even from here. It looks harmless. A white triangle. The kind of view people take on postcards to prove they were somewhere. I could try to move again. I could sell my stuff and go south where there are fewer hard surfaces. But water reflects. Eyes reflect. Nothing is a true mat. I wake at 3 whether I want to or not. I hear the click. I see the lampshade lean the smallest amount. I tell myself the house is settling and the air is changing density, and the city and the pain was a trick of fatigue. Then the phone screen on my nightstand lights up unasked and shows me a notification that has no text, just a small icon I don't recognize shaped like a lattice. The glow in the glass is not a color I can point to, and the whisper in the room is a rhythm with no words that somehow still knows my name. If it ever speaks a sentence I can understand, I don't think I'll be able to say it out loud. They asked me once if I thought Sam could still be alive. I told them I didn't know. That's still true. But there are nights when the mirror in the hall closet ticks like cooling metal, and for a heartbeat the depth inside the glass seems long, and I can almost make out a walkway with rails and a figure standing at the far end, not moving, just angled toward me in the exact way a reflection leans when it is deciding whether to step forward. I close the closet door and stand there with my head against the wood and try not to listen. The knob is warm. The whispering keeps the same rhythm whether my hands are over my ears or not. I do not go back to the mountain. I don't think I brought something back the way you bring home a burr on your sock. I think I gave something a line on me, and I think if you let it get a line on you, it learns patience from you and uses it better than you can. If you need a moral that makes sense, I can't offer one. I only have the small solid things. The crack in the ground was real. The basalt was cold. The pain glowed. My friend walked into the trees and did not walk out. When I turn off the lights, the room does not go dark the way it used to, because there is always one surface that is catching a glow from somewhere, and in that glow there is a suggestion of depth that pushes the rest of the room away. Sometimes I think if I sit very still at 3 and listen hard enough, I'll learn the rules of the not language and ask it for him. Other times I think the question itself is the hook, and the only safe rule is not to speak. So I'm writing it here for you instead of saying it out loud in my apartment where the toaster can hear. If you go up near Mount Shasta and you feel the ground hum, turn around. Walk until you hear wind and birds and the click of normal things. Do not look for the pain. If you find it, do not shine your light on it long enough for anything behind it to get your outline. And if something later taps your window from the inside, do not answer by leaning. I'm a long-haul driver based out of Fresno, and for most of my adult life, Highway 152 has just been a shortcut between the valley and the coast. If you run produce or pallets like I do, you know the drill. Out of Los Banos before midnight, up and over Pacheco Pass, through the wind and the fog that feels like wet wool, then down to 101 and on toward the bay. There's the fruit stand with the neon peacocks, the turnouts that smell like hot breaks, the high dark shape of the reservoir on your left, and the kind of fog that swallows your brights whole. It's not a place you hang out. It's a place you move through. And for years, that's all it was to me. I'm telling this because I don't know what else to do with it. People like me aren't storytellers. You keep your head down, keep your equipment tight, and keep your logs straight. But the past year has been strangers at truck stops and cops at closures and my dispatcher saying things in a careful voice. There's this thing the local guys talk about. A woman in a red dress who waves for help near the reservoir on foggy nights. Truckers call her the Red Dress. Not everyone uses the name out loud. I wasn't the type to repeat it. Stories cost you attention, and attention out there is safety. And then my friend Luis stopped answering his radio. The first night I heard about her, really heard, was 2 winters ago at the Casa de Fruta stop on my way back from San Jose. The cafe was still open, and there were 6 of us at the counter. A guy with a Raiders beanie was telling the server you're never supposed to stop for anyone on the pass after midnight, no matter what. The server had that cynical smile they all have when they've pulled a long shift and know your route better than you do. She threw down napkins, said, "Tell that to the CHP," and the old man at the end of the counter added that his cousin's kid stopped and was never seen again. Old stories like that float around every road. Someone here, someone there. But that night there was a new piece. A flatbed driver named Len said a woman had been standing by the guardrail at the reservoir, soaked and shaking, red dress plastered to her legs. He slowed, he swore, and then a pickup behind him laid on the horn. Len didn't stop. He said when he checked his mirrors, he saw nobody in the road where she'd been. The pickup blew by him full speed. A mile later, there were taillights in the fog where there shouldn't have been any. He didn't pull over to check, and he felt guilty about it all night. He didn't go back to see if the pickup had crashed or just pulled off. He said he told himself it had pulled off. The old man shook his head. The server wiped the coffee ring with a wet rag. Everybody looked into their cups like there was something there. When you run a route often enough, you get to know what belongs and what doesn't. A deer on the shoulder belongs. A broken-down Civic with the hood up belongs. The way the fog pulls back and shows you the water to your left, black as a hole, belongs. A woman in a cocktail dress at 1 a.m. waving you down with both arms like someone trying not to drown, no matter how soaked and desperate, does not belong on 152. But the mind is a bully. It pushes pictures into place and says, believe it. And when you're alone in the cab and your breath fogs the glass and the CB is quiet except for a check from 2 counties away, the mind gets loud. Luis ran the same lanes as me. We met at a way station outside Santanella 5 years back and started overlapping loads. He was the kind of guy who could make 70 miles pass like 7. He had 2 kids in Hollister. And every Friday he'd try to time it so he could drop down 25 early and get breakfast with them. Apple pancakes at some spot with a mural of a rooster. When I think of him now, I think of sun coming up over the flats and him laughing at me for tying down tarps like I was wrapping a Christmas present. He had decent instincts and decent luck. He'd tease the CHP, but he wouldn't push the pass in high wind. He called Pacheco the throat, like if you didn't move quick, it would swallow you. The night he went missing started ordinary. Dispatch sent the route changes over text at 7:14 p.m. Maria's usual "be safe" tagged at the end. I loaded crates in Mendota and aimed to hit 101 by 2. The fog was building in the low ground, rolling like something with a pulse. I passed 2 accidents on 33 and figured the pass would be worse. Luis checked in at 10:51. "You coming over the hill or Yellow Belly?" I sent a middle finger emoji. He said he'd hold at the fruit stand if I got there by 12:30. The radio was nothing but static. Sometimes when the fog is heavy at each sound, you can hear your own engine but not the tires on the next lane over. That night was like that, quiet but humming. At Los Banos, I topped off and cleaned the windshield. I thought about the woman in red only because I'd heard the story at the counter. I told myself it was a trick your brain plays. If you expect to see a thing, you'll find it. A shadow on the fog, a flare reflected twice. You give it a name and it grows teeth. 2 miles past Dinosaur Point, the road tightened and sloped up. The reservoir was a suggestion in the dark, a smear of colder black. I could see the guardrail flashing on my right like a stitched scar. I dropped a gear to keep my speed steady. The fog made everything soft except the road line. And then, listen, I saw her. She was where the gravel shoulder pinches near a drain, almost blind with fog. She had both hands up like she was waving down a friend who'd finally come around the corner. Her hair was glued to her face in wet strings. The dress wasn't the bright costume red people talk about. It was a darker red, like it had soaked up a lot of water, almost brown in the shadows. She was barefoot. Her knees were gray where the skin had scraped. She was alive. She was looking right at me. It wasn't a trick of light. I was close enough to see her mouth moving, and I read please. My instincts are what they are. I eased the wheel left, hit the 4-ways, and started to brake. I would have stopped. I know that about myself. You don't leave someone like that in the cold. I say this because I want you to know I am not proud of what happened next. I'm not proud, and I'm not even sure I chose it. The radio crackled in that same second, a sharp sound like a small balloon popping. And then Luis's voice cut through the static as if he were sitting in the passenger seat. "Don't," he said. Just that. Don't stop. He wasn't scheduled to be on channel. We hadn't been able to reach each other for the last hour. The voice jolted me like a hand on the back of my neck. I glanced at the CB out of reflex and then back at the road. When my eyes found the shoulder again, the woman wasn't there. The fog swam, and for half a breath there was only wet white and the suggestion of a shape. I thought she might have fallen. I hit the brakes harder, ready to pull onto the shoulder and walk back with a light. Then my trailer shifted. A drag, just a whisper as if the wind had caught it. I felt weight on the right side I couldn't account for. A tiny pull against the track of the rig. It's not something you can explain to someone who hasn't driven. The truck speaks. You know how it feels when it's loaded right, when you've tied your straps right, when the tires are even. This was like a hand holding the edge of the trailer skirt. Not enough to stop me, enough to let me know it was there. The hair on my arm stood up. I didn't stop. My stomach turned cold in a way that wasn't from the weather, and I kept moving. I told myself I'd call 911 at the next turnout. I told myself I'd slow and push my brights when I cleared the tight bend and see her again, and then I would stop. It's embarrassing how fast your brain will sprint to make peace with cowardice. I checked the mirror. In the red glow of my markers for less than a second, I saw a shape too close to the trailer wheels. It was low, then high, as if someone had risen from a crouch and pressed a palm to the aluminum. I jerked the wheel a hair and told myself it was the fog playing tricks with my lights, that my brain had latched onto the story at the counter and was giving me what I didn't want to see. The weight eased. When I looked again, there was nothing but my own lights. I kept my foot steady and the rig told me nothing else. At the fruit stand, there was no sign of Luis. The lot was nearly empty. Just a pickup with a tarp flapping and a sedan with fog beads like tiny pearls on the rear glass. I pulled in and called him. Straight to voicemail. I called dispatch and Maria said he'd pinged his location on the rise near the reservoir 20 minutes earlier. Then nothing. We told each other it was the fog and spotty service. We told each other he'd rolled down the far side and found a coffee. It was easier to say that than to say what we were both thinking. I slept in the cab in their back lot with the exhaust from a reefer unit purring all night. And when I woke at 5, the fog had thinned to a gauze band around the hills. I drove to the bottom of the grade, turned around on 156 and came back up slow to look for skid marks or flares. CHP was out by then, lights rotating in colors that made the fog look bruised. They had cones out at a turnout halfway between the dam and the turnoff. A cruiser idled behind a gap in the guardrail where an older dent showed rust. The officer who waved me along had one of those faces that doesn't blink at much. I passed, rolled on, and had that feeling you get sometimes that the day is ash, that the rest of the moves don't matter, that some part of you already knows how it ends. Luis didn't check in that day or the next. He didn't show at his kids' school on Friday morning. His ex called me because she had my number pinned to their fridge in case of breakdowns. We told the same lies to each other because they were easier to hold in your mouth. Saturday morning, a CHP officer came by the yard and asked me about the last time I'd heard him. I told him 10:51 p.m., radio check, crude joke about yellow bellies. The officer wrote that down like it mattered and then stared at the page a long time, his pen point pressing a dot into the paper. He asked about the woman. He didn't ask directly. He coughed up a version that pretended to be official. Any pedestrians, any unusual foot traffic? I laughed. It came out wrong. He looked at me like I'd coughed in church. I told him what I had seen. I expected him to dismiss it. He wrote that down too. His face didn't change. For the next few weeks, I stayed off 152 when I could. I added a half hour to routes to loop around and nobody complained. The fog stretched longer that winter and every time it rolled in, my stomach went tight. Guys at the counter went quiet when the door swung and new air pushed in, like the fog had followed someone inside. And the story kept coming. A fuel hauler swore he saw a woman step out from behind his own reflection in the median barrier, like she'd been standing inside the concrete waiting to match his speed. A Sprinter driver said he saw wet footprints across his hood when he stopped for coffee. Each print turned toward him. An old boy who'd lost 2 fingers to a coupling accident said he'd never talked to her, but she'd knocked on his door twice and each knock had made the glass bow. You never know which of these are drunk talk, which are loneliness talking, which are the truth. It blurs. In April, they found a bumper in the water near the dam, blue paint scraped raw, and everybody said that wasn't Luis's truck. Wrong model, wrong color. That didn't stop it from landing heavy. Maria started using the phrase "until we know" in a tight voice. People dropped off groceries at his ex's place and didn't say why. The kids drew chalk pictures in the driveway and left space in the middle like they were saving a seat. "You want a neat ending. We all do." He never got one. I kept thinking about the weight on the trailer that night and the voice that said, "Don't stop." There's a pressure in keeping something like that to yourself. It wants air. So I started to ask questions in the quiet way that doesn't put people off. I asked the guys working late at the fruit stand. I asked the woman at the counter who had smiled that cynical smile. I asked a CHP officer at a chain control stop on 5 who said he couldn't comment, then shook his head, then said, "Okay." He'd heard of 2 pedestrians struck who weren't there when they pulled over to help. He left quickly after saying it, like the words embarrassed him. Finally, on a Thursday in June, I took a load to Gilroy and swung by Hollister on the way back. There's a diner on San Benito where a framed photo of a demolition derby hangs by the register. I slid onto a stool and told the server I was meeting a guy. The guy was a retired tow driver named Eli, whose number the night manager at Casa de Fruta had scribbled on a receipt for me because he's one of those who won't shut up about her. Eli had hands, like small hammers, and eyes that didn't quite aim at the same thing. He knew me before I said anything. He said, "You lost a friend this winter," and I said yes. He nodded like that was what he'd expected. He said there'd been a spill at the reservoir in '89, a sedan wedged under the old bridge. Fog thicker than a bucket of milk. The first tow on scene was him. The driver was a young woman in a red dress, heel caught under the pedal. That part came later at the shop when they pulled it up. But at the scene, he'd looked down from the bridge and seen the glow of the taillights under the water like 6 stars. He asked the officer if they had a diver coming. The officer said yes and then changed the subject. The woman's husband had been in a second car behind a quarter-mile back when they lost sight of each other in the fog. He'd stopped at the first turnout and waited for the red lights to appear, and they hadn't. He told the officer he'd seen her open the door on the last curve for air because she hated the feeling of windows closed in that kind of weather. Eli told me it didn't make sense how fast the water took her. It didn't make sense how quiet it was to lose someone and not even hear a splash. "Silence steals your choices," he said. He looked at his coffee like it held a face he didn't want to see, and said the husband had stood at the rail and called her name until his voice broke. "By the time we got the straps on, she wasn't there," Eli said. "Car was. She wasn't. Took us 2 days to find her, and part of me thinks we still didn't." He tapped his chest. "Not where it matters." I asked him why she would wave people down. He said that wasn't the right question. People aren't who they were at the end. They're what they were doing when they realized it. She was asking for help. Maybe she still is. He said every few years she moves a little. He said when he started hearing the stories, she was always down by the water line. Then it was up by the old guardrail. Then a turnout. Then the shoulder. "You think you're getting away from something," he said. "You're really just getting closer to where it wants to meet you." I told myself I wouldn't drive the pass at night again. Then the summer slowed, and the loads shifted, and one Tuesday in August, the only way to make delivery times was to leave Fresno at 11 and climb the hill at 1 in the morning. The reservoir had shrunk back in the heat. The fog wasn't supposed to be bad. The sky was clear going in, stars like salt, the kind of night that makes the world feel honest. I rolled past the peacocks in the fruit stand, past a motorcycle cop writing a ticket in the lot, past 2 teenagers from somewhere inland arguing beside a Civic with a spoiler that barely cleared the curb. I felt okay. I thought about how fear writes its name on places and how if you don't let it sign, the place stays yours. Halfway up the grade, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, just like that. The fog wasn't the winter kind. It was low, like the breath of something sleeping. It lay along the asphalt and moved when I moved. The beams from my brights didn't show enough, so I dropped to low and focused on the lane line. I passed the first turnout and told myself the story was just a story. There was a construction sign flashing 2 lanes merge left, but there was no construction. My hands were steady on the wheel. 2 curves later, I saw a figure near the next turnout. She wasn't waving this time. She was standing still, a little angled away like she was watching the water. The dress was dark red and heavy, and where the fog touched it, the color seemed to bleed. I could see her shoulder, the clean line of it even from the cab. I could see her hair wet and flat. I could see her bare feet. This isn't where I tell you I locked up and slid. This isn't where I tell you I pressed the horn and laid on it until I could pretend she was a deer, and then feel okay about what I didn't do. What I did was I eased the wheel toward the shoulder and hit the 4-ways and coasted. I heard my own breath in the cab. I thought, this is a person, and if I drive away, I'm not the person I say I am at all the counters. I was going to stop. I wanted to stop. Something thumped the passenger door. Not loud, not violent, just knuckles. A hello knock, the kind of knock you give a friend when you don't want to scare them. The knock came again, and again it was polite. I turned my head and saw water draining off the window glass as if someone had opened a faucet over it. But the sky was clear above, and the fog was level with my bumper. I saw the shape of a hand in the runnels. 5 fingers splayed. The hand slid down the glass and was gone. I braked harder. My hazard lights ticked loud, a metronome in a room where the rest of the band had stopped playing. I felt that same tiny tug on the trailer as if weight wanted to come along. And then, just like before, the radio popped with that balloon noise and a voice I knew said my name. Not just my name. My name the way my mother said it when I'd done something right. And it wasn't my mother. It was Luis. He said my name soft and then said, please, and then said, keep going. He didn't say why. He didn't sound scared. He sounded tired in a way that went through the speaker and sat in the air beside me and looked at me like he needed me to be better than I was. I took my foot off the brake. The rig rolled. The handprints on the glass sweated away. I passed the turnout and saw the woman again, closer now, only she wasn't facing the water anymore. She was angled toward me. The way you turn toward a car you think is going to stop. The way you turn your whole body because it hurts to put hope only in your face. I looked right at her. She didn't have that movie ghost look. She looked like a person who had been in wet clothes too long. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear her. That didn't matter. I knew what she was saying. I didn't stop. I hate writing that. I hate what it says about me. I drove on and told myself I'd call in once my hands weren't shaking. I told myself I'd pull over at the bottom and tell the officer writing tickets that there was a person up there, and he should get somebody now. I told myself there would be a simple ending this time where somebody did the right thing. On the next straightaway, I checked my right mirror again to see if the trailer was tracking. That's when I saw something I haven't told anyone until now. There was a shape clinging to the rear ladder. Not a full body, not like in a bad story. Just hands. 2 hands gripped the rungs. They were small. They were the color of wet bone. They were placed one over the other and water dripped from the knuckles in a rhythm that didn't match the bumps in the road. I couldn't see a face or feet. I eased the wheel and the hands stayed. We came to a rise where the fog thinned and the red lines of my own lights washed over the trailer doors. In that light, I could see tiny parallel scratches where hands had dragged up from the bumper before. There were a lot of them, some older, some fresh, some long, some short. A child's fingernails at the end of a desperate climb and then nothing. I almost stopped then. I almost did anything different than what I did. But I didn't. I kept driving, and on the downslope where the wind picks up and the fog can't settle, the hands were gone. When I pulled into the turnout at the bottom to call 911, the ladder was wet and clean and looked like it always had. I told the dispatcher I'd seen a pedestrian in distress at mile marker, whatever it was. I told her the dress color. I told her the bare feet. She said units were already up there for another call. She asked my name and if I wanted to call back. I said no. I hung up and sat with both hands on the wheel until the sweat on my palms dried to a sticky feeling I couldn't stand. I wiped them on my jeans. I pulled back out onto 101 and drove to a lot in Morgan Hill and turned my paperwork in like people do in the middle of normal days, when nothing has happened. That was August. It's October now. Luis is still gone. His ex still leaves the porch light on when the fog is heavy. His kids keep space in the chalk drawings. Maria still says, until we know. Every week or so, on nights when the air is cool enough to hold words close, someone posts on our local channel about a woman on the pass. They say she was nearer the road this time. They say she looked younger than they expected, or older, or nothing like anyone they've ever seen. They swear the dress was red and then swear in the next sentence that it wasn't a dress at all. Just the part of the fog that holds the color of tail lights and won't let go. The officers do their best. They answer the calls and drive up slow and park at turnouts and shine flashlights into the white and call hello. The way you do when the night could still give you back something you love. The tow drivers do what they've always done, which is show up when it's ugly and hold on to what can be held. I keep my mouth shut in person because I don't want to be the guy at the counter with the story. But at night I keep hearing that polite knock on my passenger window. I keep seeing the handprints slide down and leave nothing. When I wash the cab, I look for prints and tell myself I'm only checking for dust. I still drive 152. I tell myself to use the daytime runs. I tell myself to keep my eyes on the lane line and my hands at 10 and 2. But last week there was a closure on 580, and I ended up rolling the pass at 1 a.m. again. Clear to the Peacocks. Fog past the dam, the throat of the hill tightening around me. I came around the bend where the old dent in the guardrail is and saw a figure standing very close to the shoulder. Closer than before. Not waving. Waiting. I had this thought, and maybe it's not a good one, but it came as clean as a road sign in daylight. Maybe she's not trying to get away from the water. Maybe she's trying to get back to it and we keep getting in the way. Maybe every time we slow down, every time we open a door and say, "Can I help you?" we're giving her another place to climb, another rung on the ladder, another set of hands to hold. Maybe that's why she's closer to the asphalt now. Maybe we're building the path with our kindness. I didn't stop. I didn't speed up. I drove past steady, and I felt that little pull on the trailer, the hand that says, "I'm here, I'm almost there, hold on." It eased. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. In the mirror, for a second, I saw the red smear of my own lights wash over the shape, and then the shape was gone because fog can make anything vanish if it wants to. I kept driving. I thought about Eli and the way his finger tapped his chest. I thought about Louise saying please and sounding tired and how I don't know if the voice came from the radio at all. I thought about the husband at the rail calling a name into soft white silence and not hearing a splash. There isn't a good ending. You want one, I know, but there isn't. I started writing this because someone on a forum asked what the red dress looks like up close, and because another guy said his cousin had seen her standing practically in the lane last week, and if she takes another step, she'll be in the tire tracks. Some of you will call me a liar. Some of you will say I should have stopped, that I'm a bad person, that it's only fear that kept me from doing what a human does for another human on the side of the road. You might be right. I'm not telling you what to do if you see her. I'm telling you what happened when I did. If you take 152 at night and the fog sits low and the water beside you is blacker than the sky, keep your eyes on the line. If you see a woman in a red dress waving for help, know that your truck will feel different for a second, like you've taken on weight you didn't load. Know that you might hear someone you love tell you to keep going. If you stop, I hope you save a life. If you don't, I hope you can live with the person you are after. If you drive on, and weeks later you're washing your rig and you see faint parallel scratches on the back ladder you don't remember, you'll do what I did. You'll run your thumb over them. You'll turn your hand so the water runs off your palm the way it ran down the glass that night. You'll tell yourself there's a rational explanation. You'll tell yourself that every year she stands a little closer to the road because stories have to move or people stop telling them, and then you'll turn your face toward the hill and listen, just in case a tired voice says your name and asks you to keep going, and you will wonder which way that voice is pointing you and who it's trying to save. I didn't plan on staying past sunset, but that's how it goes with old gear. You think you're coming up for a quick test? Then a stubborn connector or a flaky oscillator keeps you another hour. By the time I closed the tailgate and shouldered my tool bag, the last tour vans were already winding down Mount Wilson Road, taillights blinking through the trees. The air smelled like cold metal and chaparral. The radio towers cut the sky into straight lines. I've been working on transmitters my whole life, commercial stuff mostly. Some ham work on the side, a little consulting when someone needed a dinosaur coax line coaxed back to life. I'm good with the old things. The long shuttered station on the ridge had one more artifact to examine before the county turned the key on the whole site for good. Some volunteer at the museum called it a transmitter, but what they really meant was a half-disassembled array in a locked room that used to feed an analog TV repeater in the 80s. It was a stack of cabinets with hand-lettered labels, a patch panel like a chessboard, and a dinged metal door that stuck when the temperature dropped. The building sat behind the big dome and a line of cypress that rattled when the wind picked up. There was power, barely. There was something like quiet, the kind that breathes. Rena met me near the loading ramp with a flashlight held like she'd rather be holding a bat. She's younger than me by a couple decades and nervy in that way new techs are. Always worried they're doing something out of order. She had on a beanie with a constellation pattern and a laminated badge that said volunteer. With her was Miguel, the night guard, who I mostly knew by his habit of humming rancheras under his breath and carrying those little hotel coffee pods in his jacket to chew on when he couldn't find candy. "You're late, Don Radio," he said, then grinned, showing the missing premolar he joked about. "Traffic," I said, though it wasn't. I just took a minute in the parking lot to look at the city lights stuttering through haze and think about what this place used to be. If you know radios, you know Mount Wilson. When I was a kid, my dad would point at the blinking lights up here and explain that all of it, the shows, the news, the songs, came riding down from this ridge like a river you couldn't see. He fixed TVs in our garage in Echo Park and would tune the rabbit ears with a hand on the set like he was reading a pulse. He died before digital took over, before they cut frequencies into new shapes and auctioned the leftovers to the highest bidder. I stayed in the work because I liked the way signals passed through things and left no mark unless you built a device to catch them. Inside the transmitter room, the air tasted like dust and old ozone. The cabinets loomed in 2 rows with a footpath between, each panel dotted with pilot lights that no longer lit. The Cokes looked okay mostly. Someone had ripped the station ID encoder out years ago and left the rack with a blank scar. "If we get a clean sweep tonight, we can call it," Rena said, practical. "The board wants to finish the inventory before the first real snow." Miguel jingled his keys and leaned in the doorway. "Don't be long. After midnight it squeaks." "What squeaks?" "The air. You'll see." He made a face like he knew he sounded dramatic, laughed, and left us with the quiet hum of the little generator they'd set up to keep lights on in this wing. We did the boring work first. Power up the shop supply, verify the line voltage on the conditioning rack, run a jumper from the signal generator, listen on a handheld receiver for leakage. We took pictures of the old labels because someone would want a report with photos. The logbooks in the drawer went back 20 years in shaky cursive and thick ballpoint. A few pages had coffee rings shaped like moons. We found 2 dead spiders in the cavity behind the RF comparator and a wrinkled safety poster that promised ear protection and gave you a smiling cartoon with perfect ears. Around 9, the wind got teeth. The cypress began clacking like bones. I told Rena to call it early if she wanted. I could finish Tess solo. She shook her head. "I want the sign-off on this," she said. "If I finish, Manny said he'll let me shadow on the FM site off Temescal next month. Manny's our boss, and I guess he'd dangled an opportunity. People earn them up here by staying late, by hauling gear, by being there when everybody else goes home. I remember being that age and thinking each night shift was a rung-up. We traced the Cokes. It went through the rack, into an elbow that fed a wall pass-through, and from there up a pipe to the old antenna arrays mounted on a lattice that clung to the north face. None of it was radiating anymore, of course. The carriers had been cut years ago when the licenses lapsed. The reason we were here at all was simple. The board wanted to make sure there wasn't any stray RF leaking that might interfere with current tenants on the ridge when they eventually sold the parcel. It was a courtesy more than a necessity, but courtesy is how you keep neighbors. At 11, we took a break, sat on a coil of abandoned heliacs, and split a thermos of coffee. Rena told me about the first time she drove up the Angeles Crest and how the shadows make the road seem like it folds into itself. I told her about being a kid and sleeping in the back seat while my dad made service calls at weird hours because some rich guy wasn't getting the Laker game. Miguel checked in and offered us a peanut butter cracker. He asked me with the serious tone of a man trying to work up to a confession if I ever heard voices in the static. "On the bench," I said. "Sometimes I get Spanish ball games in Pasadena when I'm working on a long wire, and the conditions are weird. It's all reflection. You'd be amazed what bounces farther than it should." He nodded like he wanted me to be right but didn't think I was. "Not radio voices," he said, and left it there. We went back to it. The last thing on the list was to run a sweep across what the analog rig used to occupy and make sure nothing popped up. We set the spectrum analyzer on a rolling cart, clipped it into the coax chain, and fed it the loop. I watched the trace draw like a heartbeat across empty space. The long-dead channels were exactly that, dead. We swept the old VHF slots and then stepped up to UHF, though most of those were repurposed years ago. Everything looked like clean, flat water. I was satisfied. I was about to say we could call it when the analyzer hiccuped. A narrow spike jumped at the far low end, in the region where no allocations live now, where they told all the hams and TV guys to vacate 2 lifetimes back. Then it died. Then it rose again, more certain. Rena leaned in and tapped the display. That's not internal noise? Shouldn't be, I said. The floor's too clean. Could be a reflection or something funky with the preamp. I tapped the attenuator, shifted, tuned the generator out entirely so we weren't feeding anything, and the spike returned, slow like someone walking into a room and stopping in the doorway. I took the handheld receiver out of my bag, the one with the wide front end that'll swallow almost anything. I told Rena to stay on the analyzer and shout if the spike moved. I opened the squelch, turned the dial past where it should matter and heard nothing but hiss, the old comfortable wash that just means the world is full of things you can't hear yet. The spike rose another notch. Rena said, there, pointing, reflexive the way you point at a star. I put the receiver next to the panel hookup and the hiss dipped into a hollow. For a second, the noise sounded like it was underwater. Then the notch sharpened and a whisper came through that wasn't a voice yet but wasn't not. I grew up around radios. When something's there, you know. Even if it's faint, even if it's a trick, your body recognizes pattern. The first thing I heard was my name. Not my last name, not my handle from the ham club, not the nickname Miguel uses, my full name. The one on my birth certificate, spoken the way my mother used to say it when she wanted me to stop and listen. I didn't write it down because writing it would make it look like fiction. It was there. I looked at Rena and she looked at me with the kind of expression people get when the power goes out and the room feels too big. Again, she said. The whisper came with the hiss, like it rode in the gaps. It was so quiet we held our breath to keep from drowning it. It said a date. If I type that date, it will become a thing you can look up. I want you to know I never told anyone that date. It was the day I went down to the river under the Glendale Bridge with a girl I had no business with, and came back with a bruise shaped like a rope. I never told my wife the real story of that afternoon. I never told my father about the officer who stopped us on the bluff and asked my name and pronounced it wrong. The whisper said the date, the officer's name, and the little mispronunciation. Rena's mouth open, shut open. She wasn't born when that happened. She looked at me like she wanted to believe there was an explanation, but her mind was wading into it and the water was getting cold and deep. "Is this a recording?" she asked, clinging to the ordinary. No, my voice cracked in a way I hate. We're not on any known input. There's no program source. This feed is off the arrays and into a room that doesn't even legally exist anymore. I flipped the handheld to scan, just to prove to myself I could still move. It skipped across emptiness, then the whisper grabbed the squelch and held it open. It spoke again, and this time it said a name I haven't heard in 25 years. My mother's voice used to soften at that name. He was my older brother. He left when he was 19 and I was 12. He sent a postcard from Albuquerque and then nothing. We assumed he didn't want to be found. Families write kindness over holes and call it history. The whisper said his full name and the street we grew up on, and then, in a flat tone like a police report, it said June, and the numbers that match a day and time, and a stretch of desert freeway and a mile marker. There was no other claim around it. It didn't say died. It didn't say found. It said my brother's name like it was taking attendance. I've heard all the explanations since that night, rehearsed them myself to see which one might stick. A prank. A weird RF skip picking up some old recording from a basement tape in the TV station days. A pirate transmitter. One of those ghost stations kids build. An overlay of the generator's harmonics. I can diagram the guts of any of those theories until it looks like sense. I couldn't diagram how it said the pet name my father had in Spanish that he never uttered outside the house. The silly two-syllable thing that makes no sense if you're not in the family. That was next. I took the handheld away from the panel, far enough the wire shouldn't couple, and the voice stayed the same volume, like distance didn't matter. It used the pet name and then, in the same breath, told me what I did with a tool one afternoon when I was 16, and the man who owned the corner store shorted my change. I didn't hurt him. I didn't take anything. I did a small mean act with a magnet and his scale because I thought the world owed me a correction. I never told a soul. I thought about it for years after. The whisper said it in the cool, indifferent tone of an announcer. I felt 16 again, small and seen and weighted by something I couldn't lift. Miguel knocked on the doorframe and made us both jump. He had a hand on his chest and said he hadn't meant to startle us. He tilted his head and I realized the handheld wasn't loud enough for him to hear. I held it out and he took it and pressed it to his ear and his face changed. He went slack the way faces go when someone says the right wrong name. He passed the receiver back like it was hot and didn't say what he heard. "I'm not coming in here again," he said softly. "Not after midnight." Rena said we should record it. I told her to grab her phone. She already had it out because that's what kids do when something weird hits them. She recorded 3 minutes of hiss and intermittent words that, when we played them back, sounded like nothing but artifacts. On the live feed, they were words. In the recording, they were wind. Some things don't care if you save them. They happen once and leave you with the argument. The spike on the analyzer crawled. It didn't jump like a tuner would, it crept. It slid across the old allocations like a finger dragging dust across a shelf. Each time it paused, the whisper delivered a line from the private ledger of my life. When it reached the slot where I know the old emergency alert subcarrier used to ride, the whisper stopped talking to me. It said my mother's voice, and this time the voice wasn't whispering. It was the sound a person makes when they are in a room they used to own, and somebody has moved the chair a little to the left. It said a prayer she only said when she was too tired to pretend she wasn't tired. The one that ends with a request to be left alone for one night. Then it laughed the way she laughed when my brother did a card trick, a small laugh in the back of the throat. Then it said, in English, clear and unaccented, "We will be along the ridge at 3. Rena didn't look at me. She looked at the clock. It was 2:21. Miguel had backed up into the hallway like he needed air. Rena, trying to be brave or scientific or both, said we should see if it would answer a question. I've never liked that move. I've seen people lean into the unknown as if they can make it hold still. Asking is feeding, but it was her voice that said the words. "Who are you?" she asked. Her teeth clicked together after you like she was forcing them to step in line. The handheld didn't answer her in any language I know. It made a tightening sound, the way a record makes when a finger drags it, and then the whisper said her name. It said the year she was born. It said a hospital in Bakersfield that I didn't know existed. Her face went paler than the phone screen. She tried to take the receiver and I didn't let go for a second because I didn't want it to leave me. I don't know why I didn't. Eventually I gave it to her and stepped back and watched her hear something that put water in her eyes and something hard in her jaw. She said okay once, the way people say it when they are not okay. At 2:47 the lights flickered. Not the whole building, just the strip above our heads. The generator outside did that low cough small engines make when the load shifts too fast. The spectrum spike froze. The handheld went to pure hiss, a kind you can taste. We waited. The air grew a degree colder, like someone had opened a fridge door and left it. The smell changed. It's the one detail I keep thinking about when I try to decide whether to tell this as a job hazard or something else. The smell in that moment wasn't death or damp. It was hot dust on a vacuum tube. It was a smell you only get when a certain metal gets to a certain temperature inside a sealed glass body that hasn't been used for years. I know that smell because I learned on tubes. On summer nights in my dad's garage, I would lean close and breathe that warmth and think it meant adulthood and competence. That smell rose in a room full of transistor gear and cold racks. Miguel said from the doorway that the wind had died all at once. He said it like he wanted us to confirm his reality. The cypress had stopped clacking. The room was too quiet, and then we heard, over everything, a small sound like 2 fingernails tapping on the metal of the panel. Tap, 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 tap. I said, before I could stop myself, that it was licensed code for a letter. Rena asked which letter. I said it twice in my head to be sure. It was the first letter of my brother's name. Rena, the rationalist, the girl who counts connectors before she leaves, did the bravest, stupidest thing I've seen. She walked to the patch panel and touched the cold frame and said clearly, "Don't." The tapping stopped. The handheld's hiss deepened, and from that hole, like a fish rising from dark water, came a long, low voice that doesn't fit in any human throat. It wasn't evil. I think that would be easier. It sounded old. Old like the idea of distance. It said a sentence that wasn't a sentence, but I caught the bones of it. It was something like names being folded and unfolded. It was something like years being hungry. It included 3 words that made sense alone and didn't in that order. A long ridge, trade. Then the spectrum spike surged. The handheld squealed and the strip light went out. Miguel swore and then swallowed his swear. I keep a small lantern in my bag for when buildings like this remember they're supposed to be ruins. I clicked it on. The blue-white light made everything look like it does when a screen freezes. We stood in that thin glow and listened for footsteps because you always think there will be footsteps when the light goes. There weren't. There was that same alien quiet. Then distantly outside and down the ridge we heard what you might charitably call a voice, and more honestly, call a field of voices moving as one. If you've ever heard a crowd at a ball game chanting a word you can't catch because the word changes as it moves through mouths, you know the sound. If you've ever heard a flock of birds all lift their wings at once and the feather beat turns into a mass stroke, you know the rhythm. That's how it was. It rose from below the line of trees where the maintenance road drops toward a little saddle. It moved along the ridge like it had always moved there, and we never noticed because we weren't tuned right. At 3 o'clock exactly, my handheld receiver, which does not tell time, clicked into the local weather frequency even though I had it locked in a wide-open band. It read 3 on the split-second little screen that normally only shows weird alphanumerics. And then the whisper said my brother's name again and added my father's and my full real name and said, for the first and only time in another voice, "Do you hear us?" It wasn't a question and it wasn't a command. It was the sound a ledger makes when a line is filled in. Rena's phone filmed a square of blue light and our feet and Miguel's hand on the doorframe. It did not film what I will tell you next. I want to be very clear, because people will ask why we didn't step outside. We didn't step outside for the same reason you don't step into the lane of traffic. Because someone shouted your name from the median. You stay where the floor is, where the rules you understand still more or less apply. The voices passed in the trees, not close, but close enough that a moment happened I haven't been able to step out of since. The low voice, the old one, said my mother's prayer back to me. In her timbre this time, the soft and tired request. Then a child's voice I will not identify said the thing no child knew at the address we grew up at about the crack in the kitchen tile that looked like a river on a map. I was the only one who saw that crack that way. I never said it out loud. I stood there with my lantern and felt time fold. The spike dropped. The handheld let go of the squelch and went to clean hiss. The strip light flickered back and stayed. The generator's idle smoothed out like a song forgetting its bridge. The smell of hot dust eased. Outside, the wind came back in a rush and shook the cypress like a cold dog. Miguel stepped backward like a man who had been keeping still too long. Rena exhaled like she'd been underwater. She set the handset down on the cart with care, as if it might bruise. We didn't finish the report. We wrote the part that said the sweep was clean, because that part was clean. We left out the part where the empty end of the spectrum drew our history out like thread. You can think what you want of that. You can tell me we lied. Up here, the truth has more facets than a report likes to carry. On the way down the mountain, past the turnout where you can see the whole basin like a circuit board, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a picture halfway loaded that stalled at the top of a forehead. I slid my thumb to open and it crashed, and when I reopened, the message was gone. That's a nothing, a software blip, a thing that happens. It felt attached to what we left behind in that blue-lit room. I didn't sleep when I got home. I went into the garage where I keep my dad's old bench. I have one working tube set, a Hallicrafters that clicks and hums like a cat when you warm it up. I turned it on and let it drink power. I tuned the band where the old long wave used to live, not because I thought I'd get anything, just because I needed a sound. There was hiss. There were storms in the distance. A cargo ship far away pinged some channel it has no reason to ping anymore. Then, and I know this is where you will check out or check in depending on what you believe about us and the way we smear ourselves across the air. I heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was so faint I thought I was imagining it. I tapped back on the bench with my knuckles, the code for my own first initial almost without thinking. The hiss lifted like a curtain. A voice that was my mother's and wasn't said the silly pet name she saved for my father, and then, so soft I could only hear it because I knew where to listen, it said, "Along." The Hallicrafters dial light wavered with the house power. I waited for more and got storm noise and the high lonely of airplanes. I turned the set off and sat with my hands on the wood and felt how warm it was from the tubes and from my palms and from the years. If I go back up there, I think I know what the voice meant. Along the ridge at 3, maybe that's when it moves. Maybe that's when whatever it is remembers the things we weren't brave enough to catalog and carries them like old tickets between the trees. Maybe it was nothing but atmospheric ducting and my fear giving shape to signal. Maybe it was my brother, and maybe I have no right to want that to be true. What I know is that the next day, without telling anyone why, I looked up cold case indexes for that stretch of desert freeway and found a half sentence in a county report that matched a mile marker I never wanted to read. It didn't give me a grave to visit. It didn't give me a crime to be angry at. It gave me a time. It put a line in a ledger I didn't open, and then it closed it again. Rena texts sometimes and asks if radios can carry what people say when no one's listening. I tell her we carry ghosts all the time. Old shows bounce off the ionosphere and come back with their jokes bent by weather. Voices jump bands and end up in places they don't belong. A transmitter is just a way to tell the sky who you are, and hope the sky hands your name to someone else who knows what to do with it. I haven't told her that sometimes late, I hear the tapping again in the garage and I put my hand over the old tube set's dial and choose not to turn it. I stand there with my father's tool marks under my thumb and I wait for it to pass. In the morning, when the sun hits the ridge, the towers look like they're holding the sky up. At night, when the world falls quiet and the city lights flutter like moths, the ridge sends things down. If you go up there after midnight and the wind dies and the air smells like hot dust on glass, you can put your ear to an old panel and hear who you were, folded and unfolded. If you answer, be careful what you trade. I get the feeling it keeps excellent records.